My name is Thea. I'm 35. And 3 days after I gave birth to my daughter, my mother-in-law stood in my hospital room and told everyone the baby wasn't family. She held Luna like a question she already had the answer to, turned to the room full of Caldwells, and said it loud enough for the nurses stationed to hear. This baby can't be our blood. My husband's face went blank. My sister-in-law crossed her arms and smiled. And I still sore, still wearing a hospital gown, still learning how to breastfeed, did the one thing that scared them more than tears. I smiled back because I'm a genetic counselor. 12 years reading what blood actually says. And in 10 days, a doctor would walk through that door with an answer none of them were ready for. But let me go back to the beginning. Welcome back to calm drama stories, where ordinary women face impossible family moments and walk out with their dignity intact. If you've ever been made to prove you belong to the people who were supposed to love you, this one's for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Luna came into this world at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday after 14 hours of labor that nearly sent me to the O. Daniel held my hand so tight his knuckles went white. When they placed her on my chest, 6LB11O, a full head of dark hair, he cried before I did. I'm a senior genetic counselor at Ridgemont Medical Center. That means I spend my days explaining chromosomes to families who just got news they weren't expecting. I read test results the way some people read recipes, scanning for what matters, flagging what's off, translating the numbers into something a parent can hold on to. I didn't grow up with money or connections. My mother died when I was 9. Ovarian cancer, stage 4, diagnosed too late. After that, it was just me and my dad in a 2-bedroom apartment in Raleigh. He drove a delivery truck. I waited tables through community college, transferred to state, worked the evening shift at a hospital lab while finishing my master's. Everything I have, I built with hours. When Daniel proposed, I thought I was finally getting the thing I'd been building toward my whole life. A family, not a house or a title, a kitchen table where nobody was missing. A last name that meant someone was waiting for me at the end of the day. I thought giving birth would seal it. That once Luna was here, I'd finally be a Caldwell in a way nobody could question. I was wrong about that part. Diane Caldwell had been measuring me since the day brought me home. I saw it in the way she scanned my shoes at the front door, the way she asked where I went to school and then paused just long enough to make the silence say something. Her husband, Robert, Daniel's father, had been a county judge. The Caldwells had a name in this part of Virginia, the kind of name that gets whispered at church fundraisers and engraved on hospital wings. Robert died 3 years ago, heart attack at 61, quick and final. After that, Diane became the sole keeper of the Caldwell legacy, and she guarded it like a woman who had once been told she wasn't good enough for it herself. She wore a strand of pearls every time I saw her, cream-colored, perfectly matched, with a gold clasp shaped like a tiny leaf. They'd been in the Caldwell family for 4 generations, she told me once, passed from mother to daughter-in-law, but only to blood Caldwells. She'd looked at me when she said it, not unkind, exactly, just clear. The pearls weren't for me. They never would be, and Luna. Luna hadn't even been born yet, and Diane had already drawn the line. What I didn't notice at the time, because I was busy defending myself, was a smaller thing. Something Diane said to Brooke one Thanksgiving while flipping through old photos. She'd pointed at a picture of Daniel at maybe 8 or 9 and frowned slightly. He never did favor Robert much, did he? Brooke had shrugged. Diane moved on. I filed it somewhere I wouldn't think about for months. The first real jab came 4 hours after Luna was born. I was still in the delivery suite, hooked to an IV, trying to keep my eyes open. Daniel had gone to the cafeteria. His family arrived in a wave. Diane first, then Brooke and her husband Greg, then Aunt Carol with a balloon bouquet and her phone already recording. Diane took Luna from the bassinet without asking. She held her at arm's length, studying her face the way you'd examine a piece of fruit at the market. She's dark, Diane said. She glanced at Brooke. Caldwell Bobby's air affair, always have been. Brooke tilted her head and crossed her arms. She does have a lot of hair for a newborn. Carol kept filming. I I lay there in a tangle of blankets and monitors and tried to tell myself this was just Diane being Diane. Old-fashioned, fussy, not cruel, just particular. My mother had dark hair, I said. Recessive traits don't skip in a straight line. I can draw you a Punnett square if you want. Nobody laughed. Diane placed Luna back in the bassinet with the care of someone returning a library book and said, "We'll see." 2 words, flat, practiced, a door closing without a slam. Daniel came back with a turkey sandwich and a grin. "Did everyone meet her?" he asked. Brooke nodded. "We met her." I watched Diane smooth her pearls with her thumb. She didn't look at Luna again for the rest of the visit. That night, after everyone left, I held Luna against my chest and felt the thin plastic of her hospital ID band press into my collarbone. Tiny letters, Caldwell. Luna, proof of who she was. I don't talk about me, mother, much. Not because it hurts. It does, but because when I say I lost my mom at 9, people fill in a version of grief that's softer than the real thing. The real thing was eating cereal alone at 6:00 a.m. while my dad was already on his route. The real thing was learning to braid my own hair from a YouTube video in 2004, back when the resolution was so bad you could barely see the fingers. When I married Daniel, I wasn't just marrying a man. I was marrying the idea that my daughter, whoever she turned out to be, would have more chairs at her table than I did. Grandparents, aunts, cousins who'd show up for recital and bring casseroles when someone was sick. A last name that carried weight. So when Diane looked at Luna and didn't see a Caldwell, it wasn't just an insult. It was a threat to the one thing I'd spent my whole life trying to build. A family that didn't have gaps. I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the little holes in them because counting was easier than crying. Luna slept in the bassinet beside me, her hand curled into a fist the size of a walnut. Her ID band caught the blue light from the monitor. Caldwell Luna. And I read it over and over like a prayer. Tomorrow I'd go home. Tomorrow I'd set up the nursery, wash the bottles, figure out the car seat. Tomorrow I'd start proving to Diane that Luna belonged. And I hated that. I thought proving was the right word. The texts started 2 days after we brought Luna home. They came through Daniel's phone, but they were meant for me. Diane had a gift for that, saying things to her son that were really about his wife. The way a pitcher throws to first base when the real runner is on second. Just checking in, sweetheart. Has she been sleeping well? You know, newborns can be fussy when the environment feels unsettled. Then an hour later, I was talking to Carol and she mentioned something interesting about genetics. Did you know that sometimes features skip entire generations or sometimes they come from somewhere unexpected? LOL. Lol. 64 years old and she signed off her accusations with LOL. Daniel showed me the messages because he thought they were funny in a sad way. She's fishing, he said. Ignore it. I tried, but the next morning there was a new one. I'm not saying anything, Danny. I'm just saying in this day and age, it's wise to be sure. There's no shame in certainty. I wanted to throw his phone across the room. Instead, I went to the nursery and organized Luna's onesies by size for the 3rd time, because organizing was the closest thing I had to screaming. Around that time, I started noticing gaps. Daniel's cousin Patty stopped liking my Instagram posts. His Aunt Carol, who usually commented on everything, went silent. Brooke, who had never once initiated a conversation with me in 6 years, sent me a text. Hope you're resting. New moms need their strength. It read like a greeting card from someone who already knew the punchline. Someone was talking. I just didn't know how many of them were listening. I found out what Brooke had been doing on a Thursday. Daniel's friend Kyle called him while I was nursing Luna in the living room. I couldn't hear the whole conversation, just Daniel's end. What? Who told you that? And then a long silence, and then, that's insane, man. That's absolutely insane. He hung up and sat on the edge of the couch. He didn't look at me right away. Kyle said Brooke told Greg's sister that you'd been working late a lot during the 3rd trimester, he said, and that she thought it was suspicious. Working late? I'm a genetic counselor at a medical center. I counsel families going through the worst moments of their lives. Sometimes those appointments run past 5:00. Brooke had taken the most ordinary fact about my schedule and turned it into a weapon. Daniel rubbed his face with both hands. She also told Kyle's wife that Luna's coloring doesn't match the family line. Direct quote, "I set Luna in the bassinet very carefully because my hands were shaking and I didn't want to be the kind of person who held a baby while rage built behind her teeth." "Your sister is calling me an adulteress," I said to your friends. He nodded. "I know, and your mother started it." He didn't deny that either. What made it worse, what made it surgical, was that Brooke hadn't accused me outright. She'd done what Diane had taught her. She'd asked questions, raised eyebrows, mentioned things in passing. The accusation was everywhere and nowhere, like smoke in a house where nobody admits there's a fire. Daniel didn't doubt me. I want to be clear about that. He never once said, "Is she mine?" He never looked at Luna and hesitated. But doubt doesn't need to live in the person who carries it. It just needs to be in the room. He got quieter. He held Luna the same way, gently, carefully, the way he'd held her since the first minute. But something behind his eyes was working, running numbers, reviewing timelines. I'm married to an engineer. He solves problems by building models in his head, testing loads, checking where the stress falls. I could almost hear the structure creaking. "Maybe we should just do the test," he said. One night we were in bed, Luna asleep between us and her co-sleeper, just to shut them up. Shut who up? All of them. I stared at the ceiling. "So your mother accuses me of cheating. Your sister spreads it to half the county, and the solution is I take a test to prove I'm not a liar." He was quiet for a long time. "I don't think you're a liar, Thea." "Then why does the test exist?" He didn't have an answer for that. Neither did I yet. But somewhere in the dark, with my daughters breathing the only sound in the room, I started thinking like a counselor instead of a wife. A paternity test would prove Daniel was Luna's father. Fine, but Diane hadn't said Daniel's not the father. She'd said this baby can't be our blood, our the whole bloodline. And that was a different question entirely. One I knew exactly how to answer. I keep thinking about that text she sent, the one that started all of it. If someone in your family has ever made you prove you belong, you already know how that silence feels. Stay with me because the way this ends is not the way she planned it. And if you're new here, subscribe so you don't miss the moment the room went quiet. Diane called it a welcome Luna dinner. She planned it for the following Saturday at her house. The Caldwell house, the one Robert built in 1992, Thea with the wraparound porch and the dining table that seated 14. She invited everyone, Daniel's aunts, his cousins, Greg's parents, even neighbors who'd known Robert from Rotary, a welcome Luna dinner. It sounded warm. It was an ambush. I knew at the moment I walked in and saw the seating arrangement. Diane at the head, Brooke to her right, Carol across from them with a clear sight line to me. Daniel and I were placed at the far end near the kitchen, guests in a house that was supposed to be our Somday. The food was perfect. Diane was a good cook, I'll give her that. Roast chicken, green beans with almonds, buttermilk biscuits from scratch. She waited until the plates were cleared and the coffee was poured. Then she stood up. She didn't clink a glass. She didn't need to. When Diane Caldwell stood up at the head of that table, people stopped breathing. "I want to address something," she said, "because this family has always valued honesty." She looked at me the way a judge looks at a defendant. There are questions about Luna's parentage. I think we all know that. And I think the right thing, the loving thing, is to settle it. She folded her hands. A DNA test. If there's nothing to hide, there's nothing to fear. 14 faces turned toward me. Daniel's jaw tightened. Brooke was already nodding. Carol had her phone in her lap, screen tilted toward the table, and Diane added the cod she'd been rehearsing all week. No test, no name, that's how blood works. I picked up my coffee, took a sip, set it down. "Fine," I said. "Let's test the blood." What Diane didn't expect was for me to say yes. She'd built the whole evening around my refusal. The tearful denial, the storming out, the proof by avoidance that would let her tell everyone I had something to hide. When I agreed, her mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. Brooke recovered first. "Good," she said. "Then we can put this behind us." She said it the way you'd say. Checkmate. Satisfied. Final already looking past the board. Carol tapped something into her phone under the table, probably updating whoever wasn't in the room. The cousins shifted in their chairs. Greg studied his coffee mug like it contained nuclear codes. And Daniel. Daniel looked at me with an expression I recognized from 12 years in genetics. It was the face of someone who just realized the test might show more than they bargained for. I have one condition, I said. Diane's chin lifted. I'll run the paternity test. Daniel and Luna, father and daughter, accredited lab, chain of custody. But since you said our blood, since this is about the Caldwell bloodline, I want a grandparentage panel, too. I watched the word land grandparentage. Most people at the table didn't know what it meant. Diane did, or at least she pretended to. Fine, she said, test whatever you like. She smoothed her pearls. The truth doesn't care how many questions you ask it. I agreed with her there. That was maybe the only thing we'd ever agreed on. On the drive home, Daniel was quiet for a long time. Luna slept in her car seat, one fist pressed against her cheek. You know something, he said. It wasn't a question. I know how to ask the right questions. I said, that's my whole job. The week that followed was the loneliest of my life. Not because Daniel pulled away. He didn't. He changed diapers at 3:00 a.m. and brought me water when I nursed and kissed my forehead the same way he always had. But there was a glass wall between us now, thin and invisible. And every time I looked at him, I saw him running calculations on the other side. The rest of the family went quiet in a way that was louder than any phone call. No texts from Patty, no messages from Carol. Brooke sent exactly one follow-up, praying for clarity for everyone, which was the Christian lady equivalent of sharpening a knife. I didn't cry. That's not a boast. It's a diagnosis. I have a pattern. When things get bad, I don't collapse. I organize. I clean. I sort. I make lists and check margins and tripleverify results. Because if the data is clean, then the outcome is defensible. And if the outcome is defensible, then nobody can take it from me. My therapist once called it competence as armor. She wasn't wrong. Daniel tried to talk about it on Wednesday night. We could just leave, he said. Move somewhere, start over. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. I was folding Luna's burp cloths into perfect thirds. I'm not proving anything to them, I said. I'm answering textion they asked. There's a difference. He watched me fold for a while. You're scaring me a little, he said. I lined the cloths up by color. White, cream, pale yellow. Good, I said. That means I'm being precise. It came out colder than I meant it. That's the thing about armor. It doesn't just protect you from the people trying to hurt you. It protects you from the people trying to love you, too. Diane called Daniel every day that week. I heard his side of the conversations. Short, tense, mostly MHM. And I know, Mom, and we're handling it. On Thursday, she shifted tactics. She called while Daniel was bathing Luna, and I picked up by accident. Thea, she said. Her voice was the temperature of a walk-in freezer. You understand this isn't personal. It feels personal, Diane. It's about the family, about protecting what Robert built. If you have nothing to hide, this will be over in a week and we'll all move on. That's what I'm counting on. A pause. Brooke says, yeah, we're working late a lot toward the end, every other night sometimes. I held the phone away from my face for 3 seconds, breathed, brought it back. I'm a genetic counselor, Diane. I counsel families who just got devastating news. Sometimes that takes longer than a lunch break. I'm not accusing you of anything. You're accusing me of everything. You're just doing it in a way that lets you deny it later. She hung up. Daniel came out of the bathroom with Luna wrapped in a towel, her hair sticking up in every direction. Who is that? Your mother, and she's not accusing me of anything. He caught the tone. He sat down next to me and held Luna between us like she was the only thing keeping the room from splitting apart. After the results come back, he said, I'm going to need you to help me figure out what to do about her. I know, because she's still my mother. I know that, too. We sat there for a while, the three of us, listening to Luna breathe. It was the closest thing to peace I'd felt all week. Friday morning, I called my colleague at Ridgemont, Dr. Naomi Hartley. She's a clinical geneticist, board certified, 15 years, no nonsense. I'd worked with her on dozens of cases. She knew my voice, my standards, my reputation. I told her what I needed. Paternity panel, Daniel Tuna, standard markers, and a grandparentage panel, Diane Caldwell to Luna. A beat. You're running grandparentage on the grandmother. She's the one who questioned the blood. I'm answering the question she actually asked. Naomi understood immediately. A paternity test would tell us if Daniel was Luna's father, but a grandparentage test would tell us if Diane was Luna's grandmother. If Daniel was confirmed as the father and Diane was excluded as the grandmother, there was only one explanation, and it had nothing to do with me. I'll set it up through GenPath Diagnostics. Naomi said, independent lab, AAB accredited chain of custody. Nobody can challenge the results. That's the point, Thea. Her voice softened. Are you okay? I watched Luna sleeping in the swing, her tiny chest rising and falling. I'm a counselor who's about to be on the other side of the results envelope. I said, I'll be okay when the data speaks. I wasn't trying to trap Diane. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't setting a bomb. I was answering a question. The exact question she'd asked at her own dinner table. She'd said, our blood. She'd demanded proof. I was giving her proof. The kind that doesn't care about dinner tables or pearl necklaces or who built the house. The kind that just tells the truth, whether you want it or not. The group chat was an accident. Daniel left his phone on the kitchen counter on Saturday morning while he ran to the hardware store for a cabinet hinge. Luna was in her bouncer. I was making coffee. The phone buzzed, then again, then 5 times in a row. I wouldn't have looked except the preview showed my name. The chat was called Family Matters. Deanne, Brooke, Carol, Cousin Patty, Greg. 6 months of messages I'd never seen. I scrolled with the kind of clinical focus I usually saved for abnormal karyotypes. The early messages were benign. Holiday planning, birthday reminders, a recipe Carol wanted to try. But starting around my 7th month of pregnancy, the tone shifted. Brooke, October. Has anyone else noticed T stays at work until 8:00 p.m. some nights? Just saying. Diane, October. A woman who works that late doesn't have her priorities straight. Carol, November. I don't want to start rumors, but Greg's sister said she saw T having coffee with a man at the Panera on Route 9. Probably nothing. It wasn't nothing. It was my patient's husband. I'd been delivering results to both of them. But Carol had already built the scaffolding and Diane was mortaring the bricks. Diane, December. When the baby comes, we'll know. Caldwell Bobbies look a certain way. Brooke, January, the week before my due date. Maybe we should have the conversation at the dinner, all of us, so she can't twist it. And then buried in a thread from 3 months ago, a message from Diane I almost missed. I don't know why Danny turned out the way he did. He never favored Robert. Not once. But that boy is mine and I'll protect this line. I read it twice. She never favored Robert. The sentence sat in my chest like a coin dropped into deep water, spinning as it sank. I closed the phone, put it back exactly where Daniel had left it, and went back to making coffee. That sentence stayed with me through the weekend. He never favored Robert. I'd noticed it myself in a peripheral way. The way you notice a crooked frame on someone else's wall. Daniel was tall, broad-shouldered, with brown eyes and a square jaw. Robert, in every photo I'd ever seen, had been lean and narrow-faced with blue eyes and reddish hair. Brooke looked like Robert. She had his coloring, his bone structure, his thin-lipped smile. Daniel looked like neither of his parents. I'd chalked it up to genetics being messy, which it is. Phenotype doesn't follow a script. 2 blue-eyed parents can produce a brownied child if the right recessive alleles are in play. I knew the science, but Diane's message added a different weight to it. She hadn't said Danny takes after my side. She'd said he never favored Robert, and then she'd followed it with, but that boy is mine. As if she was arguing with someone or with herself. I didn't tell Daniel about the chat. Not yet. He'd want to confront Diane, and confrontation would only give her a chance to rewrite the narrative before the results came in. Instead, I filed the information the way I'd been trained. Clinical notes, mental folder, revisit when data arrives. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't change the way I thought about the test. I'd ordered the grandparentage panel to clear my name. Now I was starting to wonder if it would do something else entirely. Something nobody in that group chat had considered. Something Diane had spent 40 years not thinking about. The swabs were collected Monday. Daniel, Luna, Diane, all sampled at Jeneth's satellite office. Diane arrived in her pearls. Let's get this over with. She said 3 to 5 business days. Dr. Hartley oversaw the collection personally. She'd worked with GenPath before. AAB accredited, double-blind processing, tamper-proof chain of custody. Nobody could claim the results were fudged. Nobody could say I'd pulled strings. The samples went into sealed kits with barcodes. Diane watched the technician swab the inside of her cheek with the expression of someone enduring a TSA pattern, dignified, patient, already planning what she'd say when she was vindicated. This is the right thing to do, she told Naomi. For the family. Naomi nodded professionally. She didn't mention that grandparentage panels were unusual. She didn't explain what the results might reveal beyond paternity. She simply documented, sealed, and shipped. That was Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, Deanne had already called 3 people to tell them she'd submitted to the test willingly and expected complete vindication by the weekend. Carol forwarded her messages to Brooke with a string of prayer hands emojis. Brooke replied, "She's going to be so embarrassed when this comes back." I read none of these in real time. I learned about them later. The way you learn about an earthquake after the ground has already stopped shaking through aftershocks, through the cracks other people point out. For those 3 days, I focused on Luna. I bathed her, fed her, read to her from a book about constellations because I wanted her first stories to be about things that were ancient and reliable and didn't depend on anyone's opinion. I held her hand while she slept and studied her fingers. 10 of them perfect. Mine. On Friday morning, my phone rang. It was Naomi. "Results are in," she said. "Can you come to the office? How fast? Now if you can." I put Luna in the car seat and drove. On the drive to Ridgemont, I thought about the night Daniel was born. He told me the story once, early in our marriage, the way people share birth stories casually, like weather reports. His parents had been living in the valley then, 20 m outside of town. Robert had driven Diane to Grayson County General, a small hospital that served 3 rural communities and ran on a skeleton crew after midnight. It was a Saturday night. 2 other women were in labor at the same time. The nursery had 4 bassinets and 1 nurse covering the floor. Robert used to joke about it at Thanksgiving. Place was a zoo that night. Bobbies crying in surround sound. I told Diane I'd have built her a delivery room at home if I'd known. Everybody laughed. It was just a story, a funny detail from a chaotic night 40 years ago. But I wasn't laughing now, because I knew from 12 years of reading medical literature, from case files, from real families who'd sat across my desk, that hospitals like Grayson County General in the 1980s were exactly the kind of places where mistakes happened. Overworked nurses, handwritten wristbands, bassinets parked side by side in a shared nursery, bobbies identified by a strip of tape with a last name written in ballpoint pen. Before barcoded ID bands became standard in the mid-90s, a switch could happen in the time it took to change a diaper, and nobody would know. For decades, people kept telling me to just take the easy test and move on. I didn't. I asked the one question Diane never thought to be afraid of. 10 days later, that question walked through a door in a white coat. If you've ever stayed calm while everyone told you to panic, hit like, and tell me in the comments if you'd have asked it too. While I drove to the hospital, Diane was already making plans. Daniel told me later what she'd been doing that week, calling the family one by one, confirming attendance at what she called the resolution gathering. She'd scheduled it for Saturday afternoon at the hospital's family conference room, time to coincide with Luna's one-week wellness check. Efficient, practical, a stage dressed as a doctor's appointment. I want everyone there when the truth comes out. She told Daniel on the phone Thursday night, "This isn't about humiliation. It's about transparency." Daniel told her we'd be there. He didn't tell her that I'd already seen the group chat. He didn't tell her I'd already driven to Ridgemont to sit across from Dr. Hartley and look at 2 sets of results. He didn't tell her anything because by Thursday night he and I had agreed. The truth would speak in the room Diane had built for it, but the truth would say something she'd never rehearsed for. That Friday evening, Diane sent one final message to the family group chat. I didn't see it until much later. Tomorrow, we settle this. I've been patient. I've been fair. And I've protected this family the way Robert would have wanted. The pearls stay where they belong with blood. I'll bury them with me before I let an outsider touch them. Carol replied with a heart emoji. Brooke replied. Finally, that gold digger gets exposed tonight. Patty didn't reply at all. Luna slept in her crib, one hand open, palm up, as if she was waiting for someone to place something in it. I sat beside her in the dark and listened to the house settle. Tomorrow, 10 days after Diane had held my daughter like a question mark. Tomorrow, the answer. Dr. Hartley's office smelled like hand sanitizer and printer toner. She had 2 folders on her desk, both sealed, both stamped with GenPath's logo and a chain of custody barcode. Luna was asleep in her carrier on the chair beside me. Naomi sat across the desk and folded her hands. She had the face she used for difficult conversations, neutral, steady, with just enough warmth to keep the room from freezing. Paternity first, she said. She opened the first folder. Combined paternity index greater than 1 million. Probability of paternity 99.9998%. She looked up. Daniel is Luna's biological father. There is no question. I exhaled, not because I doubted it. I hadn't, not for 1 second. But because hearing it from an accredited lab in a sealed report with a barcode and a chain of custody meant Diane's accusation was now officially, measurably, forensically wrong. Now the grandparentage panel, Naomi said. She opened the second folder more slowly. This is where it gets complicated. I leaned forward. The report was dense also of Luna Caldwell. Naomi said the probability of a grandparental relationship is less than 0.01%. The room was very quiet. Luna shifted in her carrier. The fluorescent light above us hummed. I stared at the numbers. Paternity confirmed. Grandma excluded. If Daniel was Luna's father and I was Luna's mother and Diane was excluded as Luna's grandmother, the math left exactly one conclusion. Diane was not Daniel's biological mother. I'd run hundreds of kinship analyses in my career. I'd delivered results like these to strangers, held their hands, guided them through the implications. I'd never been the one sitting in the chair. There are several possible explanations, Naomi said carefully. Undisclosed adoption, donor conception, or given that Daniel was born at a small rural hospital in the 80s, a newborn identification error. I've already flagged a follow-up panel. If we test Brooke, we'll know whether she shares maternal markers with Diane. That will narrow it down. She paused. Thea, are you okay? I need to tell my husband, I said before Saturday. He needs to hear this from me. I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I started the car. Luna slept through all of it. The report lay on the passenger seat like a grenade with the pin still in. Diane was not Daniel's biological mother. The words kept rearranging themselves in my head, trying to find a configuration that made sense. A hospital switch. Grayson County General, 1986. A busy Saturday night, 3 deliveries, 1 nurse, handwritten wristbands. Somewhere in the chaos, 2 bassinets had been placed next to each other, and 2 Bobbies had gone home with the wrong families. Daniel had spent 40 years being a Caldwell, eating at the Caldwell table, carrying the Caldwell name, being measured against Robert's jawline and Diane's expectations, and none of it was blood. I thought about Diane's message in the group chat. That boy is mine and I'll protect this line. She'd built her entire identity around a bloodline that didn't include her own son. The irony was so sharp it could cut glass, but I wasn't thinking about irony. I was thinking about Daniel. How do you tell a man that the woman who raised him, who packed his lunches and drove him to baseball and sat in the front row at his college graduation, isn't his biological mother? How do you tell him that the blood she'd been weaponizing against his wife and daughter, the sacred Caldwell line, doesn't run through his veins at all? Not with cruelty, not with satisfaction, not even with anger. You tell him with the truth, the same way you deliver any result that changes everything. Gently, clearly, and with both hands steady. I started the car, drove home, and prepared to do the hardest thing I'd ever done in 12 years of genetics. Deliver results to someone I loved. I told him after Luna's evening feeding in the kitchen with the overhead light on because I wanted him to see my face clearly when I said it. No shadows, no ambiguity. The paternity test came back. I said, "You're Luna's father." 99.9998% he closed his eyes. Opened them. "Okay," he said. "Okay, good, there's more." I set the grandparentage report on the counter between us. Diane was excluded as Luna's biological grandmother. The probability is less than 1/100%. He picked up the report. He's an engineer, not a geneticist, but he can read data. He scanned the allele table, the exclusion index, the probability statement. His lips moved as he processed. Then he sat it down and didn't say anything for a long time. "So she's not my mother," Hess said. "Not biologically, no. Then who, we don't know. Naomi thinks it's consistent with a hospital switch. You were born at Grayson County General, small hospital, busy night. It happened more than people realize." He sat down on the kitchen stool. He didn't fall or stumble. He just sat. The way a building settles when something in the foundation shifts. I watched him and didn't touch him because I knew from 1,000 consultations that the first minute after a result like this belongs to the person receiving it. You don't fill it with comfort. You let them find the shape of it. "She raised me," he said finally. 40 years. Yes. She's still my mom. Yes, but she spent 10 days trying to throw out my daughter over a bloodline that isn't his voice cracked. He pressed his palms flat on the counter. "What do we do?" "We go to the gathering tomorrow," I said, "and we let the truth answer the question she asked." That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. I found him at 2 a.m. in Luna's nursery, sitting in the glider chair with the lights off, watching her sleep. He wasn't crying. His face had the same expression I'd seen on patients' family members 100 times, the look of someone recalibrating their entire history in real time. "I always felt different," he said quietly. Not unloved, just different, like I was playing a part everyone else had memorized, and I was still reading from the script. I leaned against the door frame. "Brew has Mom's eyes," Heck continued. "Mom's hands. Mom's way of pressing her lips together when she's annoyed. I never had any of that. Dad used to joke I was the milkman's kid." He paused. I guess the joke was closer than anyone thought. "Daniel, I'm not angry. I keep thinking about that nurse, the one covering the floor by herself on a Saturday night in 1986. She probably didn't even know. She went home after her shift thinking everything was fine." He reached into the crib and rested his hand on Luna's back. Her breathing didn't change. "Mom spent her whole life building a wall around the Caldwell blood," he said, "and I was never on the right side of it." He looked at me. "But Luna is mine, and you're mine, and that's the part that actually matters, isn't it?" I crossed the room and sat on the arm of the glider. "That's the whole point," I said. He leaned his head against my shoulder. "Tomorrow," he said, "we walk in together. We let Naomi read their salts, and if Mom falls apart, we catch her if she'll let us." He nodded. We stayed in the nursery until the light came in through the curtains, thin and blue and early. Saturday morning, the gathering was set for 2:00 in the family conference room at Ridgemont Medical, where Luna was scheduled for her 2E checkup at 1:30. Diane had orchestrated the timing perfectly, or so she thought. She'd wanted the test results read in a medical setting, surrounded by witnesses with the institutional weight of a hospital behind the verdict. She just hadn't expected the verdict to be hers. I dressed carefully, not fancy, a clean blouse, dark jeans, flats. I pulled my hair back. No jewelry. I didn't need armor today. I needed clarity. Daniel wore the blue button-down I'd bought him for Father's Day 2 years ago. He held Luna in her carrier and didn't say much. We'd said everything that needed saying the night before. On the drive over, I checked Daniel's phone one last time. The group chat had exploded overnight. "Brooke, 11:47 p.m. tomorrow's going to be rough for her. Almost feel bad. Almost. Carol, 12:03 a.m. I always said something was off. A mother knows. Diane, 7:15 a.m. wearing the pearls today. Robert would want them there for this." I locked the phone and put it in the glove compartment. Naomi met us at the hospital entrance at 1:20. She had the 2 sealed folders in a manila envelope under her arm. "Are you ready?" she asked me. "Yes. And Daniel." He shifted Luna's carrier to his other hand. "Just tell the truth," he said. "That's all anyone can do." We walked in through the main entrance, past the maternity wing, where Luna had been born 10 days ago, past the nursery window where newborns slept in clear bassinets with barcoded wristbands, and turned left toward the conference room where Diane Caldwell was already waiting in her pearls. The conference room was a rectangle with beige walls, a long table, and fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly ill. Diane sat at her head. She'd arrived early, of course she had, and positioned herself the way she always did, centered, composed, presiding. The pearls lay against her collarbone like a judge's gavel. Brooke sat to her right, legs crossed, arms folded, wearing the satisfied expression of someone who'd already written the ending. Greg was beside her, studying his phone. Aunt Carol had claimed the seat directly across from the empty chairs where Daniel and I would sit, giving herself a front row view. She'd brought her phone and a small bottle of water, like a spectator settling in for a matinee. Cousin Patty was there, too, wedged in the corner, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. 2 of Daniel's uncles sat near the door, polite and uncomfortable. The way people look at funerals before the casket arrives. We walked in at exactly 2:00. Daniel held Luna's carrier. I held nothing. Diane looked at us and something crossed her face. Not doubt exactly, but the beginning of a question she hadn't planned to ask. Maybe it was that I wasn't crying. Maybe it was that Daniel looked calm. Maybe it was that Dr. Hartley walked in behind us in her white coat, carrying a manila envelope, and took a seat at the far end of the table without introduction. "Thank you all for coming," Diane began. She didn't wait for us to sit down. "This is about family, about truth, and about protecting the legacy Robert spent his life building." She turned to me. Her chin was up. Her hands were steady. Thepperls caught the fluorescent light. And then she said it. The line she'd been rehearsing since the delivery room. "This baby can't be our blood." She said it the way you'd read a verdict. No heat, no tremor, just the cold certainty of a woman who'd spent 10 days building a case in her head and was now delivering the closing argument. The room went silent. Not the polite silence of a pause between sentences, the airless silence of a room where everyone has stopped breathing at the same time. I watched the words hit each face like a stone dropped into separate pools. Brooke nodded once, slowly, confirming. Carol's hand tightened around her phone. Greg looked at the table. Patty pressed her lips together and stared at her lap. The uncles shifted in their chairs. And Daniel. Daniel stood very still beside me, holding Luna's carrier with both hands, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere past his mother's shoulder. He looked confused. I knew he wasn't. He was deciding how to carry what he knew, how to let it enter the room without burning everything down. Diane waited for tears, for shouting, for the dramatic exit she'd scripted in her head. The guilty woman fleeing, the family rallying, the pearls passed down to Brooke's future daughter with the Caldwell name intact. None of that happened. I smiled. Not a smirk, not a challenge. The smile of someone who's been holding an answer in both hands and finally gets to set it on the table. "Thank you, Diane," I said, for asking Textion. The door opened behind us. Dr. Naomi Hartley stepped through it with a manila envelope and the professional calm of a woman who'd done this 1,000 times. She closed the door, took her seat at the end of the table, and looked at the room full of Caldwells. "Actually," she said, "there's something you need to know." Naomi opened the envelope without ceremony. She removed 2 reports, both printed on GenPath letterhead, both stamped with chain of custody verification seals. She placed them side by side on the table where everyone could see. "I'll start with the paternity analysis," she said. The DNA of Daniel Caldwell was compared against the DNA of Luna Caldwell across 21 standard genetic loci. She paused long enough for the room to register what she was about to say. Combined paternity index greater than 1 million. Probability of paternity 99.9998%. Daniel Caldwell is the biological father of Luna Caldwell. There is no ambiguity. She looked up. Luna is Daniel's daughter. The room shifted. Kara lowered her phone. One of the uncles exhaled audibly. Patty unclenched her hands. Brooke's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Diane. Diane didn't move. She sat at the head of the table with her pearls and her posture and her certainty. And for the first time in 10 days, something in her expression cracked. Just a hairline fracture, just enough to let confusion in. "Well," she said. Her voice was thinner now. "Fine, the paternity is settled, but the grandmother panel. You're in the grandmother panel, too. That will show the bloodline." She said, "Bloodline. The way a person holds a railing on a high staircase tightly because letting go means falling." Naomi nodded. "I did. The grandparentage analysis compared the DNA of Diane Caldwell against the DNA of Luna Caldwell to determine the probability of a biological grandparent-grandchild relationship. The fluorescent light hummed. Luna stirred in her carrier. Daniel's hand found mine under the table. I held it. The result, Naomi said, was an exclusion. The word sat in the room like a dropped glass. Diane Caldwell is excluded as the biological grandmother of Luna Caldwell. The probability of a grandparental relationship is less than 0.01%. For 3 full seconds, nobody spoke. Then Diane leaned forward. "That's impossible," she said. "If Danny is the father, then I'm the grandmother. That's how it works." Her voice had the brittle quality of a person who's just been told the foundation of their house has a crack and is insisting the house is fine. Naomi folded her hands. "If Daniel is confirmed as Luna's biological father, and Thea is confirmed as Luna's biological mother, which she is, then a grandmaternity exclusion means one thing. The tested grandmother does not share a biological relationship with the tested father." Diane's face was white. "What are you saying?" Naomi looked at me. She was giving me the floor, not because she couldn't explain it. She could, but because she understood that this moment belonged to the person who'd asked Textgen. I turned to face Diane. My voice was steady. My hands were still. 12 years of delivering results I couldn't soften had given me a tone that sounded almost gentle, even when the words were a hammer. "The test confirmed Luna is Daniel's biological daughter." I said, "That means I was faithful. There was no affair. There was never an affair." I let that land. Diane's mouth opened. "But the grandparentage test also showed that you are not biologically related to Daniel." I continued. "There are several possible explanations for that. But based on the ALE data and the fact that Daniel was born at Grayson County General, a small rural hospital before standardized ID bans, the findings are consistent with a newborn identification error." I paused. "Dr. Hartley has already recommended a follow-up panel with Brooke to confirm, and we've requested the hospital's archived records." The silence in the room changed. It was no longer the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of something breaking. "You're right, Diane. She isn't your blood." I paused. "Neither is he." Diane stood up so fast her chair hit the wall behind her. "That's a lie," she said. Her voice was high and jagged, nothing like the controlled register she'd used 5 minutes ago. "That lab is wrong. You tampered with it. You work at this hospital. You could have done anything." The test was run by an independent AAB-accredited laboratory. Naomi said chain of custody was maintained from collection to analysis. "The results are not in dispute. I don't care about your chain of custody." Diane's hands were shaking. She grabbed the edge of the table as if the room was tilting. "Danny is my son. I carried him. I gave birth to him. I was there." "Mrs. Caldwell," Naomi's voice was level. "Nobody is disputing that you raised Daniel. Nobody is questioning your role as his mother. What the test indicates is a biological discrepancy consistent with a hospital-level identification error." Diane turned to Daniel. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was rigid. The face of a woman choosing between grief and rage and landing on rage because it was more familiar. "Danny, tell them. Tell them I'm your mother." Daniel looked at her. I watched his throat work. "You are my mother," he said. "You raised me. I'm not arguing with that. Then tell her to throw those results in the trash." "I can't do that, Mom, because they're true." Brooke had gone pale. Her arms were no longer crossed. They hung at her sides like they had been unplugged. Carol's phone lay face down on Thedable, forgotten. The uncles stared at the far wall. And Diane. Diane looked around the room she'd built, the audience she'd assembled, the stage she'd set for my humiliation, and realized every light was pointing at her. What happened next was quieter than I expected. Diane sank back into her chair. Not dramatically, just slowly, the way a person sits down when their legs stop cooperating. The pearls rose and fell with her breathing. When I married Robert, she said almost to herself. His mother told me I wasn't good enough. She said I came from nothing. She said the Caldwell name would carry me and I should be grateful every single day. She wasn't looking at anyone. She was looking at the table. I spent 40 years proving her wrong. I kept the house. I kept the name. I kept the legacy. Her hands found the pearls. And now you're telling me the son I built it all around isn't even. She stopped. Daniel moved toward her. He knelt beside her chair the way you'd kneel beside someone who'd fallen. "Mom," he said, "you raised me. You made me lunches and drove me to practice and yelled at the umpire when he called me out at second base. That's real. That's not something a test can take away." Diane looked at him for 1 second, just one. Something soft moved behind her eyes, the briefest crack in the fortress, but then it closed. Her face hardened. She pulled the pearls off her neck and placed them on the table with a click. "This is your fault," she said to me. "Not shouting now, colder than shouting. You did this to my family." "I answered the question you asked," I said, "and the question you should have asked a long time ago." She stood up, walked past Daniel without touching him, past Brooke, who was crying silently, past Carol, who didn't even look up, and out the door. She didn't slam it. She just left. The pearls lay on the table, glowing dully under the fluorescent light, belonging to no one. The room emptied slowly, the way water drains from a sink, in no particular order, with small pauses and awkward currents. Brooke left first, red-eyed without saying a word to anyone. Greg followed her with his keys already in his hand. Carol gathered her phone and her water bottle and her balloon of confidence and shuffled out with the uncles who held the door for her like pallbearers. Patty stopped by my chair. "I'm sorry," she said, "for all of it." I nodded. I didn't know what to say to that yet. Dr. Hartley left the reports on the table and excused herself with the kind of professional restraint that only comes from years of watching families absorb the unbearable. She squeezed my shoulder on the way out. Daniel sat in the chair beside me, Luna's carrier between his feet. He stared at the pearls his mother had left on the table. Neither of us touched them. "She'll call," he said. "Eventually. I know it won't be an apology. I know that too." In the weeks that followed, things settled into the shape of a new normal. Diane didn't call. Not Daniel, not me, not anyone. Carol reported Thatch taken to her room and refused visitors. Brooke sent Daniel one text. I don't know what to say. He didn't respond. Dr. Hartley filed a formal records request with Grayson County General, or what was left of it since the hospital had been absorbed into a regional health system in 2003. The records were archived, incomplete, and would take months to review. Somewhere out there, Diane's biological child, now a 40-year-old stranger, had grown up in a different family with a different name, never knowing the Caldwells existed. And Daniel, who had always felt like a guest in his own bloodline, finally understood why. I put the pearls in a box and stored them in the hall closet. Not thrown away, not kept close, just set aside. The way you set aside a question you've already answered. 3 weeks later, Daniel drove to Diane's house alone. He was there for an hour. When he came back, he sat in the driveway for a long time before coming inside. "She's not ready," he said. "She says the hospital must have made a mistake with the test, not with me. She says she'll look into it." I didn't argue. "I told her we love her," he said, "and that Luna is her granddaughter by every measure that counts, but that she owes you an apology before she steps into our home again." He paused. She didn't take that well. I didn't expect her to. We stood in the kitchen. Luna was asleep upstairs. The house was quiet. I opened the drawer where I kept Luna's keepsakes, her first that, her going home outfit, a card from the nurses at Ridgemont. And at the bottom, folded carefully in tissue paper, her hospital ID, Caldwell, Luna. I held it up. The plastic was thin and already yellowing at the edges. The kind of band they didn't have at Grayson County General in 1986. The only band that had ever told the truth about who she belonged to. Blood tells you where you came from. It never once told anyone where they belonged. That part you choose. That's my story. One cruel sentence in a hospital room and a truth nobody saw coming. If this reminded you that family is something you choose, not something you're tested for, take that with you today. Hold the people who chose you a little closer. And if this touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.